Often in Django and other web applications, you need to know about the user's location. So we're going to build an example in this video, and you can see this super simple application. When we click the button, we're going to get the location of the user. We're going to store that in the database, and then we're going to display that location to the user on the client. And in order to do this, we're going to learn about the browser Geolocation API. Now you might want to get the user's location for a number of reasons. For example, to recommend things to do nearby, or you could do location-based queries such as getting the 10 best restaurants within a 5-mile radius. Now we can take advantage of the browser's Geolocation API for this, and we're going to hook this up with an AJAX request to save the location into the database in this video. Now before we get started, if you find this content useful, check out our Ko-fi page. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now if we go back to the Geolocation API page, this is a browser API that allows the user to provide their location to web applications if they desire. So for privacy reasons, the user is asked for permission to report location information. And if you scroll down, you will often want to retrieve a user's location information in your web app, for example, to plot their location on a map or display personalized information relevant to their location. So there's lots of reasons you might want to get a location and use that within a web application. And to get access to the Geolocation API, you can do that using navigator.geolocation. Now I want to show an example on the developer tools on Google Chrome. So if we open up the dev tools, we can access the navigator object, as you can see here, and that has that geolocation property. So if we access that, we get back this object. Now let's look at the prototype for this geolocation object. You can see the methods that are defined on this. Now the most important one here is going to be getCurrentPosition, and this method is going to be used to get the current position of the device that you're on. For example, it could be on a mobile, or it could be using a desktop PC as I'm on at the moment. So let's try and call that method. So we're going to call getCurrentPosition here, and that takes a success callback as the first parameter, as you can see here. So let's get the position here and just console.log that position to the browser DevTools. Now when we execute that, notice at the top left here, we are being asked for our permission to give the location. So I'm going to select allow this time, and we're going to see what comes back here for the location. And what we get back here is an object that contains some coordinates, as well as a timestamp as well. And if we look at the coordinates, importantly we have a latitude and a longitude here. And that gives a rough estimate of the location of the device. And I want to note that I have changed my location for the purposes of this video. So that's not the exact latitude and longitude for me within this given accuracy measure. And if you want to know how to change your location, you can clear this out here. And if you press Ctrl-Shift-P and go to show sensors here, on the DevTools you can actually change your location for the purposes of development. For example, I've selected Tokyo, but you can select any one of these, and you can also add your own locations. So that latitude and longitude is associated with Tokyo. It's not my actual latitude and longitude. So we've seen an example of navigator.geolocation.getCurrentPosition, and that gives us back these coordinates if we give it permission to do so. And this accuracy property here, that's telling us that the latitude and longitude should be within 150 meters of the actual point returned. Now let's start bringing this into a Django application. I'm going to close the dev tools here, and what we're about to do is going to work with any kind of framework as well, for example React. We're going to show how to fetch the location, send an AJAX request to whatever backend we're using, and in this case it will be Django, and then we're going to save that location to the database. So I'm going to open up VS Code just now, and we're going to go to this application that I have, and I've got a couple of models here, one for the user itself, and we've got a location model here. Now we have a one-to-one relationship here between the user and a location, and that location contains latitude and longitude. Now of course, if you were tracking a user's position through time, you might not want a one-to-one field here. In that case, it would probably be a foreign key. And we saw that button on the front end at the start of the video, so we have this simple index view here that's rendering a Django template, index.html. If we open that template, this is where we have the button that says get my location. And later on in the video, we're going to show the location details here in this div, so that's to do later in the video. And at the bottom, we have a JavaScript block here, and when the DOM content loaded event fires, this is the callback function here that we're going to write, and we're going to send that AJAX request to Django. So let's get started with that just now. We're going to start by writing some JavaScript, and of course we need to get the button that's been clicked, and it's this one here. It's got an ID of getLocationButton. So we can go down to the JavaScript here, and let's get a reference to that location button using document.getElementById. Once we have the button, we can use that location button, and we're going to call addEventListener, and we're going to listen for a click on the button, and we can write a callback function here that's going to get the location and then send that AJAX request to the server. Now to start with, we're going to check if geolocation is supported on the user browser. So we can use an if statement here, and we can check if geolocation is in the navigator object. So this navigator object has that property geolocation. We're going to check that that's on the navigator object. And unless you're using a very old browser, that should evaluate to true. And then we can use that navigator object and access the geolocation property. And we can call that function we saw called getCurrentPosition. Now that takes two functions. The first one is the success callback. And again, I'm going to paste some code in here. So what we're going to do for the success function is take the position that we get back, and we're going to send the coordinates to the server via an AJAX request. We're going to do that soon. For now, let's just console.log the position. Now, as well as the success callback, we can also pass an error callback. And let me fix the indentation here. We're just going to use console.error and print that to the DevTools. And the final parameter we can pass to the getCurrentPosition function is a JavaScript object of options. So let's do that just now. We're going to paste that in here. And again, I'll fix this. So we're going to specify that we want to enable high accuracy for the position that we get back. And we specify a timeout here to stop this request after 5 seconds. Now let's save this and go back to our application. And we're going to click this button now, and notice that when we do that, we are asked by the browser if we want to share our location. So again, I'm going to click allow this time, and notice again on the right hand side that the coordinates are displayed. Now we don't just want to console log these, we want to send them to the server. So what we're going to do is take this position here, and we're going to extract the latitude and longitude from that, and we're going to send that to the server. Now before we get started here, I'm going to run the Python manage.py create super user command. So let's create a user called bugbytes, and I'm going to give that guy a password of test. Now the reason for this is because if we go back to models.py, let me load that up just now, the location model has a foreign key to the user. So when we save a location to the database and tie it to a user, that user has to be logged in. So we're going to use the super user that I just created, and we're going to log in with that user. So let's start the Django server again, and we're going to go back to the application. And I'm on the admin UI here, and we're going to log in with that user. And now that we're logged in, when we go back to the main page here, we are authenticated with that user, and it's going to tie the location that we're about to save to the user that's logged in. So let's now move on and go back to VS Code. If we go back to index.html, what I'm going to do in this script tag here is create a function that we can call. And I'm going to call this function send user coordinates. And that's going to be a function that takes the coordinates as a parameter, and it's then going to send a fetch request. So let's send the fetch request to a location here, and I'm going to give the URL a name of save location. And this is going to be a post request because we want to save it to the database. So the method here is going to be post, and we're going to add some HTTP headers here as well. So that's going to be an object. Now we're going to send some JSON data. So the content type is going to be application/JSON. And because this is a post request being sent as an AJAX request, we also need to attach the CSRF token. Now we can do that when we send a request by setting this header here. It's called xCSRF token, and we set that to this token that's in the template. And finally, after we've set the headers here, we can specify the body that we actually want to send to the server. And we don't actually need an object here, so I'm going to use the json.stringify function. And this function is built into JavaScript, and we're going to pass an object here that contains a latitude and a longitude key. So we're going to take the coordinates that we're going to pass into this function, and we're going to reference these properties here from that object. So coordinates.latitude, and then for the longitude key, we're going to reference coordinates.longitude. So we're taking this JavaScript object with those two keys, and we're converting that to JSON data, and that's going to be the body of this post request to the save location endpoint. Now I'm going to copy the name of this function here, and let's go back down to this block of code. So for the success callback in the getCurrentPosition method, what we want to do is send the coordinates to the server via that AJAX request. So we're going to call this function, and we're going to take the position that we got back, and that has a .coordinates property, and that's what we're going to actually pass into the function here. Now the reason for that, if we go back to the browser here, the geolocation position object, that has this .coords property, that's what we're accessing, and that property is an object that contains the latitude and the longitude. So we access that property here and pass it into this function, and if we go back up to that function, this is coming in as a parameter, and then we can access the latitude and longitude on that object. Now, of course, we need to now create the Django infrastructure to actually save this to the database. So we're going to have a URL called save location. So let's go to urls.py, and I'm going to set a path here. So it's going to have the same URL path, and we're going to reference a view function called save location. So let's open views.py, and we're going to write that function now. It's going to take the request as a parameter, and we're going to need to try and process some JSON data here. So I'm going to import the JSON module from Python. And because we're going to attach a location to a user, this has to have a logged in user for this view. So I'm going to import the login required decorator, and we can decorate this view with that particular function. And one more import for now. From core.models, we're going to import the location model that we're actually going to create here. So in the save location function, what we can do here is we can try and decode the body that's been sent to the server. So I'm going to wrap this in a try except block. The data that we want to extract, we're going to use json.loads, and this is going to try and deserialize some JSON data into Python objects. And what we're going to pass in here is request.body. So because we're sending JSON data and not form data, we can't use the request.post query dictionary in Django. So instead, we use the json.loads function to convert that JSON to Python objects. Once we've done that, we can try and extract the location details. So we're going to use the data that we got here, which will end up being a dictionary after we've converted it, and we can extract the latitude and the longitude. Now there's all sorts of validation we might want to do here. For example, we might want to check that these are floating point numbers so they can successfully be converted to floats. Another thing I can do here is check that we have both a latitude and a longitude. So it doesn't make sense to store the location if you don't have both of them. So what we're doing in this if statement is checking that we have both a latitude and a longitude. If we don't, we're going to return a JSON response, and that's going to have a status of error, and let's have a message here of incomplete location data. And the status is 400 for bad request. So we're going to return some JSON to the client. We need to import the JSON response from Django at the top. So let's do that just now. And we can go back to our function and let's continue writing this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to save the user location. So let's write an ORM statement here. It's going to be location.objects.update or create. And we're going to tie the user for this location object to the logged in user, which is going to be available on the request object. So if a location doesn't exist for this user, it's going to create one in the database. Otherwise, we're going to update it if there already is one. And we can specify the defaults here, and that's going to be a dictionary. So the latitude field on the model object is going to be set to the latitude that we extracted and was sent in the post request. And we also want to store the longitude. So I'm going to copy this, and we can copy longitude and paste that in here. So if a location doesn't exist in the database for this user, it's going to create one and set the latitude and longitude. If that user already has a location in the database, the update or create method is just going to update these fields here. So the latitude and the longitude will be updated from what we've extracted from the AJAX request. And finally, we've got this try block. We need an except block. So let's go to the bottom here, and I'm going to paste this in. So what we're doing here is checking if we get a JSON decode error, and then we return the response with a status of error and the message of invalid JSON. And if we get any other kind of exception, we can catch it here. And we're just going to stringify that error and use that as the message that we're returning to the client. And of course, after we update the user location or save it to the database, we also want to return a JSON response. And this time the message, or rather the status, is going to be success. So let's paste that code in here. We return a JSON response with a status of success and the message location saved successfully. So we've come a long way here. Let's actually test this out and go back to our application. I'm going to click the Get My Location button, and we're not seeing anything at the moment, but if we go back to VS Code, we can see that a post request has been sent to the server. And if we go to the Django admin and go to locations, notice we have the location for this user being set here. So we now have a latitude and a longitude saved into the database. Now let's say that when we click this button, we want to show the location on the front end. What we can do is go back to VS Code and let's go back to index.html. So we have a section here for location details. And at the moment, this is hidden, as you can see, using the Tailwind hidden class. What I'm going to do is remove the to do here, and I'm going to paste in some code. So it's going to be simple paragraph tags with latitude and longitude. And then we have two spans with IDs here. We're going to target those and put the results into those spans. Now we can do that in the success callback. So let's go to the JavaScript that we've written. And if we scroll down here, just before we send the user coordinates to the server, we can display them on the user interface. Now what I'm going to do is go to the top of this function here, where we got the location button. And I'm going to paste in a couple of lines of code here to get the latitude and longitude display. So again, document.get element by ID, and we pass the IDs in, and these IDs correspond to what we have in the span. And ultimately these empty spans, that's where we want to place the location data. So let's go back to the function now, and once we get the position, we can set the text content of these. So latitude display, let's do the latitude first. We can set the text content property of that to a value. So we're going to take the position and we're going to get the coordinates from that, and we're going to take the latitude value. I'm also going to call toFixed, and we're going to pass in 4 to that, and that should be fixed. And let's copy this line of code to the line below, and we're going to set the longitude display as well. And this time it's going to be position.coords.longitude. And I think I've got a hidden class on this as well, so we're going to remove that. So let's just remove that from the top here, and let's save this and see what happens. Now we're back on the application and you can see at the moment there's no latitude and longitude. If we click Get My Location, the details are then filled in by that JavaScript code. And of course we could use Django to fill these default values out when the page first loads. So for example, if I go back to this page here, rather than having an empty span here, we could fill that in with the user's location details. So let's try this out, user.location.latitude, and also the longitude here for the second one. So let's fill that out and save this. That means when the page first loads, hopefully we're going to see the latitude and longitude details. Although you can see it's no longer using 4 decimal places because it's not using that JavaScript function. But if we click Get My Location, you can see it updates the UI. Now, of course, as well as all this, you could add better error handling code. If we go back to the JavaScript function here, we have the success callback, but the error callback is not really doing anything except console.logging. Now, if the lookup for the user's location fails, or if the AJAX request to the server fails, you might want to fill out this error callback and give the user a more intuitive error message. Now, the final thing I want to do in this video is just have a quick look at how you might approach this using GeoDjango. Now, if you look at the models.py file, we've got a location model that has a latitude and a longitude, and these are decimal fields. But essentially, a latitude and a longitude is a point object, and it consists of 2 values. Now, it turns out GeoDjango has a model API. You can see that here from django.contrib.gis.db. We can import models and then we can reference different types of fields, for example, polygon fields and raster fields. Now, if we look at the right hand side, there is a point field as well. That's one of the spatial field types, and that stores a point object. So let's see what this is. Now, a point object can store an X, Y, and Z value, and we can also pass a spatial reference ID, and the point can store the latitude and longitude effectively. So if we wanted to refactor our models, if we were using GeoDjango, at the top here, instead of from django.db, we could import the models from the GIS module, and we could replace the latitude and the longitude with a point field. So let's do that just now. We'll create a field called point, and that's going to be a models.point field. And finally, for the server, if we go back to views.py, this statement here was responsible for creating or updating the location in the database and tying it to the authenticated user. For the defaults, we've removed the latitude and the longitude fields and replaced it with a point field. So let's paste a line of code in here. The field is point, so that's the key in the defaults dictionary. And what we're doing for the value is instantiating a point object and passing in the longitude and latitude. And the point object, again, can be imported from django.contrib.gis.geos. And that's quite difficult to say in a Scottish accent, but that's the module there, and that has a point object that you can instantiate and use that to then save that data to the database. So that's just an overview of how you might approach refactoring this if you were using GeoDjango. But if you are using GeoDjango, there are some other things you need to install, and you can see at the bottom, for example, the GDAL library, and that stands for Geospatial Data Abstraction Library. You would need to install that and some other packages, and you also would need a geospatial database of some kind, for example, PostGIS, and that is a geospatial extension for PostgreSQL. Now, I'm hoping to do a proper series on GeoDjango very soon on this channel where we dive deep into geographical data. And we're going to see in that series how to set up PostGIS with Django and how to use GeoDjango and the objects and functionality that it provides in order to build some kind of geographical application. If you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. Just to finish the video, what I want to do is go back to the way we had this application and just do one final overview of what we had. So we had a location model with a latitude and longitude field, and that location is tied to a user. And what we had in our application was an index.html template. And if we scroll up here, we had a button that said Get My Location. When we click this button, what we're doing is we're triggering a request. So on the button, we have an event listener here listening for the click event. And then we are calling the navigator.geolocation.getCurrentPosition function. And that's going to get back some coordinates if it successfully completes. And we're going to take the position that we get. We're going to display it on the user interface. And then we are going to send that data to the server using this function here. So we pass the coordinates into that function. And you can see them coming in to this function here. And then we send a fetch request to the save location URL. And that's a post request with the headers here. And because it's a post request, we need to also attach the CSRF token. And the body that we're sending to the server contains the latitude and the longitude that's been extracted using the Geolocation API on the browser. If we go to views.py and we look at the view that we have here, it's called save location. What we do is we use json.loads to parse that body that's coming into the server. And then we extract latitude and longitude here. And then what we're doing is performing some very basic validation, but ultimately we are going to save that data to the database. So we use the location model, and that has an update or create function We tie the location to the user, and we are sending the latitude and longitude through using the defaults keyword argument. So if a location belonging to that user already exists, it's just going to update the latitude and the longitude. So I hope that makes sense. That's all for this video on using the Geolocation API in the context of a Django web application. If you have any similar requests for content like this, let me know in the comments. If I've done anything wrong, let me know in the comments too. And thanks again for watching. If you want to support the channel, check out our Ko-fi page. Thanks very much to everybody that's donated on that page. It's greatly appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.